So you now understand what Microsoft Power BI is, you've downloaded Power BI Desktop, and you've explored the user interface a little bit. You're now ready for the most important step in building a Microsoft Power BI report for the first time, loading data. In this video, we're going to be talking all about loading data into Microsoft Power BI. First, we're going to be talking about the difference between import, direct query, and live connection mode. Then we're going to be exploring the various data connectors available to you in the Microsoft Power BI application. And then finally, we're going to be loading data from Excel, CSVs, and a database. In this case, we're going to be using a Databricks free account. And along the way, I'm going to be dropping some practical tips as someone who's been working in the business intelligence space for the past 10 years. So are you ready? Well, let's jump into the computer and let's get started. So I've gone ahead and I've opened up Microsoft Power BI Desktop. In order to load data into Microsoft Power BI, you typically click this Get Data button or any of these shortcuts along here in the Home tab. And it will open up all of the various different data sources that you have access to in Microsoft Power BI. Now, when you use any of these connectors, Microsoft Power BI is going to connect to the data in these services in three different ways. The first way is it's going to import that data. So that means at a scheduled time, or when you click the refresh button, it's going to go to that service, pull all of the data down, and then compress it. The second way is it's going to direct query these data sources. What that means is when you interact with a visual on the report, it will go ahead and it will write a dynamic query that will go out and fetch data in real time. And then the third way is it's going to live connect to an existing analysis services cube. Now, what are analysis services cubes? Well, every single time you publish a Microsoft Power BI report up to the service, it creates what's called a semantic model in the Microsoft Power BI service itself. However, these semantic models under the hood are essentially just analysis cubes themselves. Separately, you can also create an analysis services cube with various third-party services or host one in Microsoft Azure. If you're connecting to Analysis Services Cube that has not been created by you just simply publishing up a Microsoft Power BI report, you can connect to it by clicking this SQL Service Analysis Services Database. Isn't that a mouthful? When you hit this connection, it'll pop up and ask you for a connection string. As you can see, you have two options, either a live connection or an import. Yes, you can import from a cube into your new cube. However, if you are connecting directly to an existing Microsoft Power BI semantic model or analysis services cube, you can either hit the OneLake catalog button to discover all data available on your service and then connect to a semantic model. Or you can click this get data and then go get data from Power BI semantic models and then simply connect to a data set. Now, when you connect to an existing analysis services cube or to a Power BI dataset, what you'll notice is that your ability to uh, create data or view tables goes away. This is because you're connected live to an existing cube. You are building in what's called a thin report. In other words, you're just simply building a report. You're no longer building a data model. This is very different when you're connecting with import or direct query. Here I have a Microsoft Power BI report where I've imported in data. As you can see, I can see the data that I imported and I have a table. When I go ahead and I build a visual in this Microsoft Power BI report, data loads pretty much instantly. On top of that, if I go ahead and I disconnect from the internet, I can still go ahead and I can still load in new data. However, here I have a Microsoft Power BI report that is in a direct query mode. As you can see, if I go ahead and add a table and then drag over a field, what it'll do is it will sit and spin. And this is because it's reaching out to the external service that has the data, executing a query, and then waiting for data to be returned. Once data has been loaded, you can go ahead and drag in additional fields. Just every single time you modify the visual, it's going to be executing additional queries, which means that when you add in that data, you might have to wait a second for data to be returned. On top of that, if I go ahead and I disconnect myself from the internet again, when I go ahead and try to add a new field, it's going to error out. And that's because it's going to fail to correctly query that data source. And as you can see, after a few minutes of spinning, I now have an error saying error fetching data for this visual. In general, when Microsoft Power BI reports are using direct query mode, they're going to be a lot slower to interact with. Now, you might be wondering, well, why would you ever use direct query mode? And the answer is pretty much twofold. One, you're dealing with a really high volume of data. That's too much data to import into Power BI realistically. Or second, you're dealing with a real time application. In other words, you always need the Power BI report to fetch the most up to date data. So now that you know all of the different connection modes that a Microsoft Power BI report can use to grab data, let's take a look at some of the various different connections that Microsoft Power BI can utilize. So let's click this Get Data button again, and let's go through a few of these different categories. The first category is this file section. This is where you're able to bring in flat file data. As you can see, Microsoft Excel is here as well as SharePoint. The section after that is this database section where you have the ability to pull data from a large collection of databases. Then we have Microsoft Fabric, which is the other side of the Microsoft Power BI service coin, which allows you to do some really cool advanced analytics functions. Next, we have Power Platform, then Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud, other online services, like, for example, Salesforce, Azure DevOps boards, GitHub, LinkedIn, and then finally, a collection of other services. Honestly, the number of services that you can use to connect and bring data into Microsoft Power BI can be a little bit overwhelming. But let's just simply connect to a CSV file for the first time. So I'm going to go over here to the file section, and then I'm going to go over here to text backslash CSV. And I'm going to connect to a Microsoft CSV file right here by clicking this raw data CSV. And I'll include this CSV linked down below in the video description for you to go ahead and download. And let's click open. And this will bring us to a common dialog that we'll see when connecting to most data sources. We'll have two options. The first option will be to load the data directly into our model. This is the simplest way. And we'll show you that in just a second with an Excel file. But the other option that you'll have is this button right here that says transform data. When you click this button, it'll go ahead and it'll bring you into Microsoft Power Query. We're going to be covering Power Query in more detail in an upcoming video, but I just wanted to show you that you can go ahead and you can rename columns, for example, by typing in order ID, as well as reorder or delete columns by moving them over, and then deleting by simply hitting the delete button. Once you've transformed the data or renamed the columns the way you want, you can simply hit close and apply to load the data into the Microsoft Power BI report. Alternatively, if you didn't want to do any transformations when you hit load data, it would have just spun and loaded the data exactly as is. So let's go ahead and let's try that again by going get data, text CSV, selecting that same CSV, clicking open, and instead of clicking transform, let's just click load right here. And as you can see, it will go ahead and it'll load it. And I now have two data sources loaded into my Microsoft Power BI report for me to build with. So now that you've seen how simple it is to connect to a text or a CSV file, let's go ahead and let's try connecting to a Microsoft Excel file. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hit get data, then I'm going to go to Excel workbook, and then I'm going to go ahead and click connect. Now here I have a raw data Excel file that I will also link down below in the video description, but I'm going to connect to it by clicking this open button and loading it into the Microsoft Power BI report. As you can see, when I load into that Excel file, it'll pop open this window right here, and it will have a selection right here for every single worksheet on the Excel file. In this case, I want to load result. So I'm going to double click that and it's going to bring up all of the data in the Excel file for me to load. And I can load it again by clicking this load button, or I can transform it by dropping columns, renaming columns, or who knows what I want to do by clicking this transform button. And then finally clicking load. Now, one note about loading local files like we're doing right here with a CSV or an Excel file. Uh, Microsoft Power BI is importing this data and it's importing it with what's called a relative path. So if we go into Power Query by right clicking and then clicking this Edit Query button, what you'll notice is that when we go to source right here, it's referencing a local path to the Microsoft Excel file, or it's referencing a local path to the CSV file. Now, what this means is that if we go ahead and we publish this Power BI report up to the Microsoft service, unless you've created a connection with this same path, the file will not refresh. And let's publish this report up to the Microsoft Power BI service and let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to hit this publish button. I'm going to save this Power BI report. Then in the pop-up, I'm going to go ahead and publish it up to a workspace by just simply selecting the workspace and then hitting select. And let's take a look at what problems we run into when we try to refresh this Power BI report. So let's go into the Microsoft Power BI service by clicking this link. And then once we are into the service, it will load onto our Power BI report. But let's go ahead and let's look at that data set by clicking this little drop down here, navigating over to the workspace, and then finding the corresponding data model. And here is that same data model, and it's connected to our CSVs and our Excel files. But when I try to click this refresh now button, what you'll notice is that it will error out with a little warning. And that's because it is unable to connect to our Excel files from the service to our local computer. Now, there's two ways around this. One is you can create what's called a data gateway and configure that data gateway over here in the settings. But configuring a data gateway can be pretty challenging and it'll probably require support from your local IT department. So the other option is that we move the files that we want to connect with, or the local files we want to connect to with Microsoft Power BI, onto SharePoint. So let's go ahead and let's do that, and let's connect to a Excel file that we host on our SharePoint site. So here I am on SharePoint, and I'm going to go to this example site that I created for this demo. I'm going to click Documents, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to connect to this Excel file right here that's titled example. So I'm going to go back into our Microsoft Power BI report. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go get data, more, and this time I'm going to search for SharePoint up here. Now, I am going to choose to get data from a SharePoint folder. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click connect. It's going to ask me for my SharePoint site URL. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this URL right here. And I'm going to go ahead and then click OK. And it's going to ask me what I want to use to connect to this SharePoint site. I'm going to use a Microsoft account. So I'm going to hit sign in. It's going to prompt me to log in. I'm going to log in and then I'm going to hit connect. Now, once I am connected to this SharePoint site, it's going to pop open this window. Instead of clicking load, we're going to hit transform data. So it opens up Microsoft Power BI, and we're going to double click into the binary data that's linked to the Excel file that we want to connect to. And it'll go ahead and it'll import in that Microsoft Excel workbook. I can then select the data from a specific sheet by selecting the table button right here, at which point I can now go ahead and load in this data. If I have headers, I can promote them by clicking this use first row as headers. Finally, exiting Microsoft Power Query by hitting this close and apply button right here, which will load the data off of our SharePoint site and into Microsoft Power BI. The reason why I'm showing you how to connect the data in Microsoft SharePoint is because a lot of people new to Microsoft Power BI make the mistake of building their report without thinking about how they're going to refresh the report once it's built. If you build a Microsoft Power BI report on top of files that are on your computer locally, you'll have to either have a gateway or download the Power BI report, refresh it manually, and then publish it back up. However, if you build the Microsoft Power BI report on top of files that are hosted on SharePoint, people can just edit the Excel file or the files on the SharePoint site directly, and then you can schedule your Microsoft Power BI report to refresh automatically every single morning in the Power BI service without having to do any additional configurations or set up a gateway. So, with all of that said, jumping back into Microsoft Power BI Desktop, you've now seen how to pull data out of a CSV or text file, how to pull data out of an Excel file, and how to pull data out of an Excel file hosted on SharePoint. Let's talk about how you can pull data out of a database. So let's go ahead and let's click get data. And then I'm going to be connecting to Databricks, which Databricks is actually a data lake, or as they self describe, a lake house vendor. But we're not going to be covering that in this video series. So for now, just know that it is functionally a database. So I'm going to connect to it by clicking Databricks, hitting connect, and then giving it the details of my Databricks account. After pasting in some connection details, we then can give it a default catalog. And then we can either type a native SQL query that it'll use to execute, or we can just hit OK and it will bring up the ability for me to select a table. You also notice that because this is a database that we're connecting to, we have the option to either import data or to direct query it out of that database service software. For now, I'm going to leave this on import and I'm going to hit OK. And when I do, it's going to pop open a navigator that will allow me to drill in and select a table in our database. In this case, I'm going to select DIM product and I'm going to click load, which will then prompt Microsoft Power BI to reach out to Databricks and start to load data off of the service. So now in this single Microsoft Power BI file, we have data loaded from an Excel file, data loaded from a database, in this case, Databricks, and then we have data loaded from a CSV. As you can see, if I go over here and I click into model view, I have all of those data sources brought in locally to my Microsoft Excel file. And this is one of the things that's really powerful about Microsoft Power BI. It's that it can connect to multiple services and it can pull it all in to a singular data model. So let's talk about the different things that we learned in this video. The first thing that we learned is we learned about the different modes that Microsoft Power BI can use to connect to data. It can live connect to existing analysis services cubes. It can direct query from databases, or it can import data from a wide variety of different sources into its own Power BI semantic models. Next, we learned how to load data from a few different data sources. The first of which was a CSV, the second of which was an Excel file, the third of which was an Excel file hosted on SharePoint, and then finally, the fourth was a quick example of connecting to a database. Now, in the next video, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into Power Query. You saw me touch on it lightly in this video, using it to rename and delete some columns, but trust me, it can do a lot more. So if that video isn't up already, stay tuned because it should be coming shortly. But if it is, go ahead and jump onto it because Power Query is something you don't want to miss. Thanks for watching.